Thank you very much, Mr. President. This Saturday, we're going to mark the one-year anniversary of the shooting in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, in which 20 little 6- and 7-year-old boys and girls lost their lives, as well as 6 adults worked in that school who were charged with protecting them. And Senator Blumenthal and I have come down to the floor today to offer some thoughts as we reflect on 365 days past since the most horrific mass shooting that most of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. And I think back a lot on that day, being in the Sandy Hook firehouse as the parents realized that their sons and daughters weren't coming back from that school. And one of the things that I remember, Mr. President, about that day is getting an awful lot of phone calls from my colleagues from all around the country, senators and congressmen who represented places like Columbine and Aurora and Virginia Tech and Tucson. And they all called because they had been through this before, and they wanted just to offer their condolences and a little bit of advice on how a community can try to get through these just awful, tragic, shattering incidents. And I sort of thought that day how awful it was that there were that many colleagues, that many representatives from across the country who could call and give me advice. What a tragedy it is that we are amassing this bank of expertise across the nation on how to respond to mass shootings. And it speaks to how far and wide the carnage and the devastation is from these mass shootings that are occurring now, it seems, almost on a weekly or monthly basis somewhere around the country. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. You know, in 1949, a guy by the name of Howard Unruh went through the streets of his town of East Camden, New Jersey, firing shots indiscriminately such that he killed 13 people. It was the nation's first mass shooting. Now, we have unfortunately had a lot of mass shootings since that first one in 1949. But here's what's stunning. Of all of the mass shootings that have taken place since 1949, half of them took place from 1949 to 2007, and the other half have taken place in the last 6 years. Something has gone wrong. Something has changed. The problem is it's not this place. We're approaching the one-year mark of the school shooting in Sandy Hook, and it will be a week of mourning. But here in the United States Senate, it should also be a week of embarrassment. It should be a week of shame. That after 1 year passing since 20 little boys and girls were gunned down in a 5-minute hail of furious bullets, that the United States Senate and the House of Representatives has done nothing to try to prevent these kind of mass atrocities in the future. So, Mr. President, I want to come down here today, not just to challenge this place to act, but to tell you a little bit about what I've learned in the last year. I've learned a lot, but I just want to distill it down to 2 pretty simple things that I've learned. I didn't work on the issue of gun violence when I was a member of the House of Representatives, in part because my corner of Connecticut didn't have tremendously high levels of gun deaths. Now it is central to my mission as a United States Senator. And what I've learned over the last year is that despite all the rhetoric that we hear from the gun lobby, when you change gun laws to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and to take dangerous military-style weapons and ammunition off of the streets, guess what happens? Communities become safer. And the data tells us this. Since 1998, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System has blocked more than 2 million gun sales from prohibited purchasers. That's up to 2 million criminals, people with criminal histories that should not have bought a gun, that were prohibited from buying a gun. The background check system works, but for the fact that only about 60% of gun purchases actually go through the system because more and more guns are being bought in online sales, more and more guns are being bought online, more and more guns are being bought at gun shows. We know that background checks work because we've stopped 2 million people who would be prohibited from owning guns because they have a history of domestic abuse or serious felonies or mental illness. 2 million times we've stopped those people from getting guns. Second, we can compare what happens in states with near universal background check systems versus states that have looser laws. I'll give you one statistic for instance. In states that require a background check for every handgun sale, there is a 38% reduction in the number of women who are shot to death by intimate partners. Deaths from domestic violence are almost 40% less in states that have near universal background checks. The same data exists for assault weapons as well. In 1994, we passed the assault weapons ban. And over the next 9 years, crimes committed with assault weapons declined by 2/3. Now, there are legitimate arguments that there are other factors that contributed to that decline, but certainly a portion of that decline is connected to the restriction on assault weapons. 37% of police departments reported a noticeable increase in criminals' use of assault weapons since the 1994 federal ban expired. And Mr. President, when it comes to these high-capacity magazine clips, we don't need the data that's out there because common sense just tells us that if somebody decides to do mass damage with a high-powered weapon, they're going to do less damage if they only have 10 bullets in a clip rather than 30. Adam Lanza in Sandy Hook Elementary School got off 154 bullets, killed 20 children and 6 adults in less than 5 minutes. In Tucson, a 70-year-old retired Army colonel and a 61-year-old woman were able to subdue the shooter when he went to change cartridges. In Aurora, the rampage essentially stopped when James Holmes went to switch cartridges. When you have to reload multiple times, there are multiple opportunities for these mass shootings to stop. Now, we should do things to make sure that the shootings never begin in the first place, but the carnage is much worse when these madmen are walking into shopping plazas, movie theaters, and schools with 30-round clips and 100-round drums. But here's the second thing I've learned, Mr. President. I've learned this as well over the last year. I've learned about the amazing ability of good to triumph over evil, even when this place doesn't act to change the laws. I've learned that despite the evil of those 5 minutes in Sandy Hook, the community of Newtown has amazingly found a way over and over and over again to bring so much beauty and goodness to essentially cover up and drown out that horror. I've seen these kids' memories become the inspiration for literally thousands of acts of generosity and kindness. Daniel Barden was just a genetically compassionate little kid. He was that kid that always sat with the kid in school who didn't have anybody sitting next to them on the bus or in the classroom. When his parents would take him to the supermarket, they'd be all the way to their car with their groceries. They'd look back, and Daniel was still at the door holding open the grocery store door for people that were leaving. His parents started up a Facebook page that just challenged people to engage in little small acts of kindness in Daniel's memory. It had about 40,000 likes at the last time that I had checked, and the stories are endless on there. A woman who bought coffee and donuts for a firehouse in New York State, a Missouri woman who helped restock a food pantry in Daniel's honor, a woman in Illinois who paid for a stranger's meal and just wrote "Love from Daniel Barden" on the bill. Jack Pinto was a really active 6-year-old boy. He enjoyed playing sports of all kinds. He was buried in his New York Giants jersey. His parents, Dean and Tricia Pinto, have raised money and put some of their own money in to pay for hundreds of children all around the country to have access to the same kind of opportunity to play sports that Jack did, despite the fact that their families might not have the resources that the Pintos do. Jessica Ricos loved animals. She loved whales and horses most. And so her parents started up a foundation, the Jessica Ricos Foundation, and they've provided year-long scholarships for horseback riding lessons for students who wouldn't otherwise have the resources to be able to have the opportunity to enjoy horses in the same way that Jessica did. And this week, an effort is underway in Newtown and across the nation to inspire people to every day do a different act of kindness as a way to pay tribute to the one-year anniversary. These charities that have sprung up in the wake of Newtown, they're doing amazing work to change people's lives. Just the small acts of kindness that maybe we all do in trying to pay tribute to the memory of those kids and those adults. That makes a difference. But, Mr. President, charitable acts and changes in behavior, they are just necessary, though insufficient, responses to the scourge of gun violence that plagues our nation. This place has to change the laws. Do something. Because you don't want to be next. You don't want to be sitting on a train station platform, as I was on December 14th, when you get a call that 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 kids or adults have been gunned down in your state. And you certainly don't want to get that call when you had a chance that you didn't take to do something to prevent it. I got calls that day from my colleagues all across the country because there aren't many corners of the nation that haven't been touched by gun violence. 11,000 people have been killed by guns just since December 14th of last year. And when one person is killed, psychologists tell us that there are at least 10 other people who sustain life-altering trauma as a result of that shooting. So just imagine when 26 kids and adults die in a small community. So I want to leave you not with my words, but with the words of a mother from Sandy Hook who represents the scope of the trauma that has been the reality for Sandy Hook for the last 365 days. Sandy Hook is recovering, but very slowly. The charities and the acts of kindness, they make a difference, but there is a lot of head shaking in that community as to why this place hasn't risen to the occasion, shown the same type of courage that those families have, and done something to change the reality of everyday and exceptional mass violence across this country. Here's what this mother writes. These are her words in an open letter. In addition to the tragic loss of her playmates, friends, and teachers, my first grader suffers from PTSD. She was in the first room by the entrance to the school. Her teacher was able to gather the children into the tiny bathroom inside the classroom. There she stood with 14 of her classmates and her teacher, all of them crying. You see, she heard what was happening on the other side of the wall. She heard everything. She was sure that she was going to die that day, and she didn't want to die for Christmas. Imagine what that must have been like. She struggles nightly with nightmares, difficulty falling asleep, being afraid to go anywhere on her own. At school, she becomes withdrawn. She cries daily. She covers her ears when it gets too loud, waits for it to happen again. She is 6. And we are furious. We're furious that 26 families must suffer with grief so deep and so wide that it's unimaginable. We're furious that the innocence and safety of my children's lives has been taken. Furious that someone had access to the type of weapon used in this massacre. Furious that gun makers make ammunition with such high rounds and our government does nothing to stop them. Furious that the ban on assault weapons was carelessly left to expire. Furious that lawmakers let the gun lobbyists have so much control. Furious that somehow someone's right to own a gun is more important than my children's rights to life. Furious that lawmakers are too scared to take a stand. She finishes by writing this. I ask you to think about your choices. Look at the pictures of the 26 innocent lives taken so needlessly and wastefully, using a weapon that never should have been in the hands of civilians. Really think. Changing the laws may inconvenience some gun owners, but it may also save a life, perhaps a life that is dear to me or you. Are you really willing to risk it. There must not be another Sandy Hook. You have a responsibility and an obligation to act now and to change the laws. I hope and pray that you do not fail. I yield the floor.